You are living in a fortress with all the gates wide open. Right now, thousands of behavioral engineers in Silicon Valley are finding ways to crack your attention. You think you are choosing, but in reality, you are reacting. Your mind is constantly exposed to psychological attacks because you have never installed a defense system. This episode changes that. We are closing the back doors and activating the cognitive firewall. In the framework of an autonomous individual, identifying manipulation is not an auxiliary skill, but a core survival operating system. Social engineering does not just attack computers, it attacks the biological vulnerabilities of humans. Most people mistakenly believe they are smart enough not to be fooled. But social engineering does not target intelligence. It targets the hardware architecture of the brain. 1. Biological vulnerability. The amygdala hijack. The human brain is a legacy of millions of years of evolution, designed for survival in the wild. The amygdala is the center for rapid response to threats. When you see a shocking headline like "Emergency Alert," your account has been compromised, or shocking news about the economy, the amygdala activates fight or flight mode. At this point, blood and energy from the prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical thinking and logic, are drained. You become a purely reactive creature. Manipulators know this. They don't need to convince you. They just need to panic you for 3 seconds. Those 3 seconds are enough for you to click a malicious link or make an impulsive purchase. 2. The forced trust protocol. Authority, bias, and similarity. Robert Cialdini, in his book Influence, pointed out that humans tend to comply with entities that seem powerful or similar to them. Modern spear phishing is not just a fake email. It is the construction of a perfect psychological profile of you. They use social media data to know your likes and anxieties. When a stranger speaks exactly what you are thinking, the brain automatically labels them friendly and lowers the firewall. This is how narrative manipulation campaigns operate. They don't create new truths. They simply reinforce what you already want to believe. Confirmation bias. 3. Dopamine mechanisms and the feedback loop. Social networks are not just communication tools. They are digital slot machines. Every like, every red notification is a dopamine hit. Dopamine is the hormone of anticipation, not satisfaction. It forces you to keep scrolling, keep checking. When you are in this loop, your long-term thinking capacity is disabled. You become vulnerable to any idea packaged as breaking news or trending. 4. The scarcity technique, manufactured urgency. Only 1 hour left. Last 3 spots. This is how economic algorithms seize control of your decision-making process. Scarcity triggers the fear of missing out, FOMO. When in fear, you are no longer an architect. You are prey. A cognitive firewall is not a passive shield. It is an active data filtering system, a biological filter that stops toxic information before it can infiltrate your cognitive cache. If Part 1 taught you to identify the enemy, Part 2 is about building the fortress. 1. The cognitive zero trust principle. In cybersecurity, zero trust is a security model that requires strict verification for every device and user. Applied to the mind, cognitive zero trust means you never default to believing information just because it comes from a familiar or reputable source. Operational mechanism. Every incoming data stream, input, must be held in a buffer zone. Here, information is labeled raw data, personal opinion, or emotional manipulation, multi-factor authentication, MFA for belief. Before allowing information to become a belief, you must verify it through at least 3 independent sources with opposing viewpoints. If the data fails this step, it is quarantined. 2. The technical defense layer. Information hygiene. You cannot have a clear mind if you constantly consume digital junk food. Attention. Ad blocking. This involves proactively removing distractors. Disabling notifications isn't just for peace, it's to protect the bandwidth of your prefrontal cortex. Source audit. List the news sources you consume daily. Assign them indices, knowledge value versus emotional noise. Ruthlessly drop sources with high noise levels. 3. The mental defense layer, cognitive logic gates. The cognitive firewall uses questions as logic gates to check data integrity. Gate 1. Origin. Authentication. Who benefits from me believing this? Cui bono. Gate 2. Evidence. Check. Is this data based on objective facts or emotional provocation? Gate 3. Contextual analysis. Is this information taken out of context to serve a specific agenda? 4. Deep scrubbing and mental sandbox protocols. These are the advanced techniques of a human hacker. Deep scrubbing. Every week, perform an audit of newly acquired beliefs. Ask yourself, why do I think this? Is this my idea or the product of a media campaign? Mental sandbox. Before entering high manipulation environments, like social media debates or toxic workplaces, simulate the scenario in your mind. Practice maintaining composure under attack. Once you have rehearsed, your firewall will respond automatically instead of draining your willpower. In the architecture of the human hacker, emotions are categorized as high-priority data that are extremely vulnerable to exploitation. Social manipulators do not target your logic. They attack your emotional backdoor. Emotional buffering is not about suppressing feelings or becoming a soulless robot. Instead, it is about creating latency between a stimulus and a response. Without this buffer, you are merely a reactive entity, a slave to algorithms and the outrage of the masses. 1. The biological mechanism of emotional hijacking. To build a buffer, you must understand your adversary. When provocative or negative information enters the brain, it is sent to the amygdala, the center for raw emotional processing. The amygdala functions dozens of times faster than the prefrontal cortex. This creates a low-road response, making you react before you can think. The result is a surge of cortisol and adrenaline that paralyzes logical reasoning. An emotional buffer is an artificial barrier designed to force data onto the high road, passing through logical analysis centers before being converted into action. 2. The 4-second protocol. This is the core technical drill. Research indicates that a wave of emotional chemicals lasts about 90 seconds if not fueled by further negative thoughts. However, the first 4 seconds are the most critical. Execution mechanism. Upon noticing a stimulus, for example, a critical email or a hostile comment, you must execute a physical disconnection protocol. Breathe deeply to activate the vagus nerve, sending a safe signal to the brain. This creates a gap large enough for the prefrontal cortex to regain control from the amygdala. 3. Emotional de-identification. Technique. The greatest human error is identifying the self with emotions. I am angry is an erroneous statement. In the operating system of an autonomous individual, the correct command is, I am observing a data process labeled anger running on the system. By changing the language, you detach the self, subject, from the emotion, object. You are no longer the anger, you are the observer of the anger. This reduces the emotional intensity to a minimum, allowing you to process it as a spam file rather than an executable command. 4. Case study. Systematic social media. Outrage. Look at how algorithms spread outrage. A post is designed to trigger your sense of justice or fear. Without a buffer, you would immediately write a furious comment. This act releases dopamine and sucks you into the loop. A human hacker with a buffer recognizes this as a spoofing attack. Instead of reacting, they analyze the structure of the post. Why did the algorithm show me this? What do they want me to feel? What do they want me to do? When you begin to analyze, the emotion automatically dissipates. In the world of modern manipulation, raw data is rarely presented directly. Instead, it is always wrapped in a guided narrative. Humans are storytelling creatures. We are programmed to understand the world through scripts with a beginning, a climax, and an end. Social manipulators understand this vulnerability. They don't try to make you believe in a number. They try to make you believe in a story where that number is merely a supporting detail. Debunking the narrative is the ability to peel back the emotional shell to see the actual data structure underneath. 1. The power of the framing effect. Every guided narrative begins by choosing a frame. The framing effect is a cognitive bias where people react differently to a particular choice depending on how it is presented, for example, as a loss or a gain. Manipulation mechanism. A news report could describe a policy as saving 90% of the population, or resulting in 10% deaths. Although the data is the same, the story of salvation creates support, while the story of death creates outrage. Defense protocol. A human hacker must always perform a reframing process. Ask yourself, if this story were told from the opponent's perspective, what would it look like? This helps you see the data points that were intentionally cropped out of the frame. 2. Source and intent tracing protocol. Every story has an author, and every author has an agenda. To decode, you must run a 3-layer tracing process. Layer 1, who is telling? Verify the true identity of the source. Is this an independent expert or an organization funded by an interest group? Layer 2. Why now? Timing is part of the manipulation. Why is this news exploding right when another more important event is happening? Is it a red herring to distract public opinion? Layer 3. What data is hidden? Manipulators don't usually lie outright. They tell half-truths. Search for omitted information to complete the full picture. 3. Breaking confirmation. Bias. This is the toughest battle because it goes against your own instincts. We tend to believe stories that confirm what we already believe. Social media algorithms are designed to create echo chambers where you only hear stories that reinforce your beliefs. Multi-dimensional debunking. To decode, you must proactively seek opposing narratives. Read articles from sources you hate the most with a cool head. If you cannot understand your opponent's logic, you are still imprisoned in your own story. Truth is never at the two extremes. It always lies in the complex gray area in between. 4. Decoding virtue, signaling, and the common enemy. A powerful guided narrative often creates a common enemy to unite the crowd and uses virtue signaling to make you feel like you belong to the good side. When you see content that overemphasizes the division between us versus them, be on high alert. That is the most elementary manipulation technique aimed at shutting down critical thinking in favor of tribal instincts. Mental encryption is the most advanced level of cognitive security. While a firewall blocks external attacks, encryption ensures that even if an attacker successfully breaches your defenses and accesses your data, they cannot understand or manipulate what they find. In a world of manipulation, being transparent is a disaster. Being unreadable is freedom. 1. The concept of the private key. In cryptography, a private key is used to decrypt sensitive information. In the mind, your private key consists of your core values and your grand strategy. The common error. Most people expose their keys through social media posts, superficial conversations, or virtue signaling. When manipulators know what you value most, for example, recognition, compassion, or security, they use those very things as bait to lead you. Encryption. Protocol. Keep your greatest intentions and deepest beliefs private. When you do not publicize your source code, algorithms cannot predict your next move. This is security through unpredictability. 2. Information obfuscation techniques. Obfuscation is the technique of making source code complex and difficult for outsiders to understand while remaining perfectly functional for the owner. Application in communication. When faced with interrogation or social pressure, you do not need to explain your thinking in detail. Use multi-layered responses or strategic silence. This prevents others from reverse engineering your psychology to find vulnerabilities. Objective encryption. Never talk about results before they manifest. Speaking too early depletes the dopamine needed for execution and allows external opinions to install the virus of doubt into your project. 3. Case study. The fall of open book leaders. Many leaders who believed in radical transparency became victims of their own openness. When every thought was public, opponents could easily devise a counterscript based on exactly what they had shared. A human hacker understands that transparency is for authenticated peer protocols, not for the world at large. The fortress of self is the final integrated state of all the defense tools built in Topic 8. It is not just about defending against attacks, it is about establishing a reality where you are the sole sovereign. A fortress is strong not because it has the highest walls, but because it possesses an invariant core amidst a constantly changing world. 1. The invariant core. This philosophy is distilled from modern Stoicism. The invariant core is the part of your mind that no algorithm, economic crisis, or social criticism can reach. Building the core. It is constructed on absolute self-acceptance and internal discipline. Once you have defined your own value, external praise or blame becomes mere background noise. The state of imperturbability. This is the ultimate goal. You observe the world's chaos without letting it define your internal structure. You respond to reality through choice, not compulsion. 2. Active defense strategy. A fortress does not sit passively awaiting an onslaught. It proactively scans the environment to detect threats early. Pruning toxic nodes. Proactively abandon relationships, news sources, and habits that weaken your defenses. If a social app constantly consumes mental resources without providing value, the fortress executes an uninstall command immediately. Establishing safe zones. Set up specific times and physical spaces completely free from technological interference. This is where the personal OS is maintained and upgraded without noise. 3. Transition from defense to creation. Once the fortress is secure, the energy previously spent on fear and reaction is released. This is when you begin to project your reality outward. You are no longer shaped by the world, you begin to shape the world around you according to the standards of your fortress of self.